James Cockayne. I'm the Director of the Centre for Policy Research at United Nations University. It's my great pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon for the launch of this new report by Eleanor Powles, the Research Fellow on Emerging Cyber Technologies at United Nations University. And as you see on the screen in front of you there, the report is entitled The New Geopolitics of Converging Risks. Hardly a day goes by, it seems, that we don't hear about some new breakthrough in pattern recognition by artificial intelligence, or on the alternate days, perhaps it's some disturbing application of artificial intelligence capabilities. It's very much in the news, it's very much on the minds of both senior leadership and the membership of the United Nations at the moment. And it poses some very big and fundamental questions about what it means for multilateral institutions to seek to prevent conflict and violence and other harms in an era when artificial intelligence capabilities are increasingly ubiquitous, increasingly cheap, increasingly available to non-state actors. As this issue became clearer on the UN's agenda about 15 or 18 months ago, we at UNU decided that as part of our mandate to bring evidence into policy processes at the UN, we needed a thinker who could help us think through the big or the deep questions on these issues. And we were very pleased to find Eleanor Powles, our main speaker today, to help us think these things through. Eleanor comes to her mandate as a research fellow at UNU-CPR with extensive background, having worked both in government and regional organisations and at the forefront of thinking about cyber and other advanced technologies at the Woodrow Wilson Centre in DC. And we're also very pleased that she is joined today on the panel by Ambassador Juan Sandoval-Mendiola. Thank you so much for making time to be with us today, Ambassador. Ambassador Sandoval-Mendiola, as many of you know, has played a key role as a leading voice and thinker on issues of science, technology and innovation as the chair of the STI Forum last year. So we're very pleased to have your expertise with us today, Juan, to serve as a respondent once Eleanor has presented her report. And also our good friend Teresa Whitfield. Thank you, Teresa, again for being with us and for bringing your expertise, in particular on the prevention side, I guess, of the agenda that we're going to be discussing today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Eleanor to present the paper. She'll speak for about 20 minutes and then we'll have responses from each of Juan and Teresa. We are on the record, and welcome to anybody who is watching on the internet. We are being live webcast through UN Web TV. After the interventions, we will open up the floor for a moderated session of questions and answers. So we're greatly looking forward to a robust engagement. Thank you all for being here and for your time. And we're looking forward very much indeed, Eleanor, to your insights.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to be here today. And I'm humbled, really humbled and delighted by your presence. And I wish to express special thanks to our rector, David Malone, as well as partners in thought at UNU-CPR, James and Adam. I'm grateful because over the past year, I had the privilege to share insights with diplomatic and intelligence communities, travel overseas to meet with foreign officials, and visit the brightly colored offices of tech companies and other labs that design the tech of peace and war. Meanwhile, I treated the UN as a laboratory itself. And the report we are launching today unveils the lessons from this journey. The core opening lesson is a diagnosis. We don't assemble today because we agree, look alike, are socially compatible or wish to fuse together, but because we are brought by complex, divisive matters of concern. From the situation in Syria, Yemen and Myanmar to modern terrorism, you all know and you all face everyday complexity. Yet in response, the alliance of tech diplomacy and policy is weakened by reductionism. We struggle to overcome fragmentation of expertise, vision, and diplomatic efforts. We suffer from pervasive degradation of truth and trust. In our attempt to envision a shared future, we still often forget to include the imagination and talent of women and groups at the margins of our societies of abundance. Our legacy policies are often static, not dynamic, unequipped to co-evolve with the emerging opportunities and risks triggered by the combination of AI with other powerful dual-use technologies. As a result, reductionism may poison prevention. This report chooses a drastically different epistemic approach with the aim to build a foresight capacity into prevention, reducing the gap between early warning and early action. It provides a combinatorial matrix of our futures, analyzing combinations of technologies and actors, as well as converging opportunities and risks. And by using a foresight and convergence approach, this analysis unveils two major takeaways. First, the combination of AI with other emerging technologies is changing the nature of conflict, impacting political security and social cohesion in new ways. What is at stake is the technological power to analyze, but also manipulate and control the integrity of data, information, knowledge, and strategic intelligence within the functioning of countries' political processes, economic infrastructures, and even populations' bodies and minds. And I mean bodies and minds. You may know that about a month ago, scientists used algorithms to automate cyber attacks on hospital CT scan, creating falsified cancer images that deceived even the most skilled doctors. Now transpose this hack to preventive diplomacy, and we'll see in a few minutes what happens. A second implication is that states in the global south may be the first vulnerable targets in this new geopolitics of AI cyber conflicts, making prevention even more complex and crucially needed. My colleague often asks me if I'm an optimist or a pessimist, another binary code, which makes me think that I need this caveat. This study is not intended to be depressing, and a lot is said about tech benefits, but to be a lucid exercise of anticipation to help the UN and member states collaborate on effective prevention strategies. My remarks today will summarize four main ideas of the report. What is AI convergence? How can scenarios help us think about emerging opportunities and risks? What are the implications of AI convergence for prevention? And which policy recommendations could empower the UN and member states? We are witnessing a time of technological rupture, with four major shifts that lead to pervasive challenges for prevention, human, and political security. The first is what I call AI convergence, a new phase where AI optimizes the data of our physical, biological, and digital lives. And relying on this predictive intelligence, AI can then automate other technologies, from cyber and biotech to robotics and additive manufacturing. And the resulting effect is emerging properties never dreamed of, for instance in medicine and disaster relief, but also increasingly difficult to understand, anticipate, mitigate, and control. So think of AI systems able to drastically amplify the nature and scope of cyber attacks, or to design deepfake simulations based on populations biometrics that could initiate and fuel conflicts. As you understand, tech convergence operates in a new domain for human action, cyberspace, where national and international rules of the game have yet to be created. The second shift is the fact that the convergence of AI and cyber technologies is inherently dual use, and you know that. AI systems and the knowledge of how to design them can be optimized for both offense and defense, civil and military context. And so we have to realize that without foresight, it may not be possible for AI engineers to avoid producing research and systems that could be misused in cyberspace. The third shift is about new processes of tech decentralization, which alter who is responsible for technology's benefits and risks, leading to what I call new forms of atomized responsibility. As they combine, technologies become more decentralized, beyond state control, available to non-state actors, and challenging established governance models. For instance, cyber mercenaries are trading malware and expertise across borders, operating in states that are unable to steer the governance of technologies away from weaponization. The last shift is the increasing permeability between civil and military contexts, between civil and weapon technologies, leading to new forms of invasive cyber war and cognitive emotional conflicts. So the center of gravity for at least some conflicts is shifting away from military forces towards critical cyber and physical civilian infrastructures, political processes, and the social cohesion of targeted populations. A next stage in my study unveils 4 scenarios, 4 plausible futures which involve AI and converging technologies. The scenario I choose to share with you first is AI for prevention, which epitomizes the exceptional power of AI convergence to lead to innovative, large-scale crisis and conflict prevention. In essence, AI is a game changer for conflict prevention because it drastically amplifies 4 functions. First, data optimization and predictive intelligence, which may be used in conflict analysis, monitoring, and complex decision-making before and during mediation. Imagine that mediators could rely on a series of AI simulations combining data about water scarcity, food insecurity, epidemic outbreaks, patterns of economic exclusion and migrations. In brief, a predictive matrix to anticipate the short and long-term impacts of the deep drivers of conflict. AI geospatial analysis already assists mediators to localize ceasefires and public protest in real time, providing support for early warning. Another example is what is called HALA, a precision warning system that uses algorithms, remote sensors, and social media to inform civilian populations about lethal airstrikes. And during the Syrian war, this form of predictive intelligence might have reduced casualties up to 27%. A second game-changing function is the power of AI to detect visual anomalies with extreme precision. For instance, the UK Home Office has developed a tool that detects 90% of Daesh propaganda with 94% accuracy. Because they can be trained to detect anomalies, AI systems, when combined with facial recognition, will increasingly play a role in virtual investigations in the context of election monitoring, violence outbreaks, and conflict mediation. Third, with progress in affective computing, also called emotion analysis, deep learning could become a powerful tool to monitor public discourse in an array of languages and identify early signs of hate speech and its potential to escalate in hate crimes. Finally, AI systems have the power to automate other technologies. For instance, swarms of drones can bring vaccines and medicines to conflict zones. They can be equipped with facial recognition, biosensors, and chemical sniffing to map flows of refugees and migrants. Such systems could facilitate rescue, reduce trafficking, and support integration strategies. Yet, the same predictive tools could also be misused to close borders and target, detain, or attack those populations already at risks. And indeed, the same 4 functions of AI can be misused in a mirror scenario titled The Deception Machine, which will challenge almost every step in conflict prevention and mediation. The Deception Machine describes how AI convergence could simulate and control information, amplifying hybrid cyber threats, political and social manipulation, to the extent of turning our trust deficit disorder into a global epidemic. The first type of misuse in the deception machine is data poisoning. Data poisoning. By manipulating sound, images, and content, AI technologies will allow the automated simulation of data, from deepfake videos to deepfake backstories and cover-up. And so data poisoning could corrupt intelligence in systems for conflict analysis and early warning. What is at stake is the integrity of information within our global intelligence system, with implications for military, cyber, and financial stability. Now think of AI cyber influencing as another combination to sow deception during mediation. A cyber attack could successfully target mediators and compromise a combination of personal and official channels of engagement. Conflict parties could then be exposed to AI data poisoning, destroying the integrity of information within chains of communication. And such AI cyber influencing could then escalate into physical and kinetic impact. Third, emotion manipulation will also provide us with hyper-targeted disinformation campaigns in which key demographics are manipulated to affect voting behaviors at crucial times, potentially resulting in election shaping. As we witnessed in Myanmar, in India, and supposedly in Kenya during the last elections, emotion targeting can be exploited into swarms of chatbots that foment violence, discrimination, and political manipulation. And with Daesh, the automation of extremely violent propaganda became a new virtual theater of war. So this time what is at stake is the cognitive and emotional disruption of our societies, what I call cognitive emotional conflicts. They could erode diplomacy, the power of democratic institutions, sow civil violence, and enable fertile ground for terrorism. The next scenario, smart but vulnerable cities, links AI cyber deception with new forms of urban violence that could increase civilian insecurity. So AI's automation of decentralized technologies, such as drones and additive manufacturing, provides new ways for non-state violent actors to hack or smart, connected, but vulnerable cities. For instance, manufacturers never anticipated that Daesh would harness off-the-shelf drones to modify them using 3D printing with the goal to drop explosives on unsuspecting forces. AI systems can be used to automate cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, from energy to medical and biotech supply chains. Similar cyber attacks could automate swarms of micro drones to spread chemicals and neurotoxins in water and food systems. In smart cities, most network architectures will run on automated workflow and AI-powered data optimization, which are all vulnerable to cyber attack. Which raises important questions. How will the diffusion of power in hybrid forms of conflict enabled by AI convergence make prevention less effective? How can we anticipate new risks to adapt and enhance prevention strategies? The last scenario, the Internet of Bodies, Genomes, and Minds, shows how biopower is magnified under AI convergence, leading to both domestic surveillance and coercion, as well as cyber colonization of states in the global south. In a nutshell, the question here is, what will happen to democratic governance when algorithms can commodify and control the biological data of large swaths of population? And indeed, AI systems equipped with biosensors and facial recognition already analyze our biometrics, vital signs, emotions, and behaviors. Yet soon, AI and affective computing will combine with genomics, bio, and neurosciences. And this will lead to a boon for precision medicine, but also toward a society which may be to some extent post-privacy. And so we may give up to AI systems unique access to data about our bodies, genomes, and minds, and create new potential for new forms of social control and biocontrol. So you could call this phenomenon pervasive algorithmic and biosurveillance. I call it the Internet of Bodies. Again, the implications for privacy, agency, and human rights are powerful. We need to update our models of privacy protection by giving intimate data, bio and neurological data, the same protection as organs, something you shouldn't trade for financial gain. Because in this scenario, the Internet of Bodies, nothing lives or dies without being monitored and commodified. Another crucial implication of the Internet of Genomes is about global dynamics of data predation and cyber colonization, which could lead to new conflicts around biodata. So capacities in AI and biotech will allow tech leaders to quietly capture the value of another country's bioeconomy, its genomes, microbiomes, and data ecosystems for their own economic growth. Inequality between countries may rise if this new form of cyber colonization happens without the transfer of skills and financial benefit sharing. So these foresight scenarios have led me to build a matrix of emerging security and policy challenges. It's on page 48 of the report, and you have a sheet with it. And the next step is to collaborate with member states and UN entities to design agile responses for prevention and responsible innovation. The scenario unveils a new geopolitics of inequalities and insecurity with three major takeaways. First, the landscape of hybrid security threats is expanding, as well as the attack surface. Second, states in the global south may be struggling to compete, build, and secure capacity in the deployment of AI and converging technologies. They may become vulnerable links in a new geography of AI cyber conflicts, which could provide a backdoor to impact and attack other states. They may also turn more vulnerable to dynamics of data predation and cyber colonization, becoming test bed for dual-use technologies. Such vulnerabilities may lead to fuel competition for supremacy in tech convergence rather than promote incentives for digital cooperation. Finally, and too often neglected, security risks have a powerful long-term impact on human well-being. To prevent conflicts, we need to foster social resilience, the capacity of individuals, communities, and systems to survive, adapt, and even transform in the face of political and socioeconomic shocks. Today, most vulnerable populations, and often women, are in no position to claim the right to envision and shape how AI and converging technologies will impact their jobs, their lives, and futures. So as you understand, the challenges emerging on the tech frontier are complex, ambiguous, and potentially corrosive for the multilateral system. Constellations of UN actors already exist that are trying to grasp with these issues, but essentially what is missing is a capacity to cut across disciplines and sectors and co-evolve with complexity, to understand converging risks and reduce the gap between warning and action. So building on this diagnosis, I propose a few governance recommendations, which are analyzed more extensively in the report. First, achieving the UN prevention agenda will require building an inclusive foresight capacity to anticipate the nature and scope of emerging security risks that will impact not only nations, but more precisely vulnerable populations. And here the UN can play a unique role by providing a safe space where the private sector should collaborate with policymakers and civil society to anticipate potential scenarios of technological misuses and governance failures. So equipped with such a predictive analysis, private and social entrepreneurs, private sector and the UN, would be in position to improve technological design to account for and mitigate externalities. This foresight capacity could connect issues across mandates, and it could be done in collaboration with public and private innovation labs around the world. UNDP is building a network of new labs. All of this could happen in this structure. Second, member states and the UN need to develop multi-stakeholder mechanisms that promote responsible innovation and consistency across normative frameworks produced by national, regional, and private actors, and convincing companies to share vision and knowledge and accept normative checks and balances beyond self-regulation will be crucial to meet the ethical needs of a globalizing world. So we essentially face two tensions: transparency over secrecy and cooperation over competition. Member states interested in shaping responsible AI convergence could enter into mechanisms with countries in the Global South to collaborate on data trust, security practices, and pools of talent and technologies. And finally, it is time for government to urgently build a new social contract in the era of AI convergence, for instance, by investing in measures that can promote public literacy, meta skills, and reinforce networks of social cohesion and resilience. So to conclude, my intimate conviction is that the UN and member states need a better understanding of the nature and scope of emerging security risks and opportunities, and a better understanding of the global policy challenges triggered by AI convergence. And this can only be achieved through a form of inclusive and responsible foresight, in particular including states in the Global South. I call it equality in anticipation. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you so much, Eleanor. I think you gave us a little bit of a foresight of what's in store for all of you who go away and read the report. Sometimes I feel when speaking with Eleanor that it's a little bit like going into a web page and you go to the drop-down menu, and I'm just really still at the top level or maybe the second level, and she's already got down to the fifth or sixth level. We're very privileged to have your insights and your foresight. All of you have a copy here of the report that you can take away and study some of that richness more slowly and more closely that you saw Eleanor summarize so beautifully there. We have, in fact, given Ambassador Sandoval Mandelaire and Ms. Whitfield an advance copy of the report because it is so rich. We felt that they needed some time to be able to read and study it in order to offer some informed responses. And I'd invite you now, Ambassador, to share those with us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cockayne. Thank you very much to Dr. Malone, Eleanor Powell's fantastic job. I would like to thank the Center for Policy Research and the United Nations University for bringing the United Nations the opportunity of having such a good report and to launching it here, and especially for inviting Mexico, who has taken the lead in these topics, for this presentation. Let me start by congratulate Eleanor for the superb document that brings together what we have been trying, this positive side of technological change that we have just empirically discussed in the United Nations in the last 3 years maybe, and especially for identifying the potential threats that the technological change and all the disruption that we are living, that we are going to live, is posing to all the states. I also congratulate you for the foundation of the analysis, which is taking artificial intelligence as the mother of all the frontier technologies, thus suggesting that the convergence of AI with other technologies is exactly the element that is bringing the disrupting scenarios that you are presenting to us. This is a first conclusion we could draw from the analysis. Tackling artificial intelligence is the basis of our conversation on the impact of new technologies in our lives. It's like the most evidence, the most empirical finding that we can have. And artificial intelligence is basically machine learning, and is where the most essential and basic threats are posed to ourselves. Rather than talking about the technologies themselves, my comments will be about how the challenges the UN faces in general, and that can be applied to any field of our activities in the organization, and how to bring up the speed of the organization in order to remain relevant when it comes to the specific realm of technology. I think that's why it is important and relevant for us. I will concentrate my comments around the 5 main areas that are anticipation, prevention, the multi-stakeholder nature of the challenge, the centrality of the state and those of the UN, and the need for linkages among the pillars of the organization. I found that the key question that Eleanor poses, and you pose a lot of questions in the report, should be a must for all the countries while dealing with technological change, and is also a question that should be posed to the United Nations. Eleanor, you ask on how can the multilateral system better understand and anticipate risks since artificial intelligence convergence with dual-use technologies intrudes into the political, social, economic, and security spheres, creating new potential for systemic vulnerabilities and disruptive inequalities. That's one. And how the UN can build better anticipation and prevention capacities to face the risk. Well, if we just concentrate, we can spend the next 15 years of our lives trying to solve this, of course. But anticipation is something extremely important, and it was one of the things that's one of the main reasons Mexico brought these topics to the organization. It is widely recognized that the United Nations must be able not only to manage conflicts once they have erupted, but we should have the capacity to anticipate when they are going to happen. And this is exactly what you just mentioned. We are seeing terrible problems coming, and we have to anticipate. Frontier technologies is a textbook case of this. We are increasingly aware of the challenges we will face in the future if we do not start to think creatively on how to tackle the challenges that we're going to face. It is true that Mexico decided to focus its efforts on the positive side of new technologies and how they can help us to achieve the sustainable development goals and targets. That is where the shared consensus, the consensus to deal with the topic was at the organization. Of course, we were not going to come bringing apocalyptic visions of technology to trying to then be constructive and trying to find solutions. We had to see the positive side of things at the UN at least. Eleanor calls this in the report AI for prevention, a positive scenario of AI convergence. And her analysis goes beyond what we have been able to achieve in the intergovernmental level by making a connection with SDG 16, that Teresa, I'm sure that you're going to talk about it, and she explained how technologies have helped us in facilitating migrants' rescue operations, alerting civilians of impending airstrikes, preventing election frauds, crimes, and even terrorist acts, and detecting hate speech, among other things. But there is another dimension that is not that positive, and she organizes it in three areas. And you call it the deception machine, the degradation of truth and trust, where propaganda is not only disseminated, but is also targeted. In second place, the Internet of Bodies, Genomes, and Minds, that you have referred now, that can lead us to cyber colonization, in which it is possible to capture and potentially control the data value of a country's population, ecosystems, and bioeconomies. And in third place, inside the smart but vulnerable cities, factories, and laboratories, in which cyber attacks can happen on critical infrastructure, such as electric power systems. These examples are worrying, to say the least. Therefore, the evidence is present and we have to act on it. We have a responsibility to ensure that these technologies of dual use are not used for the wrong causes. That's our biggest challenge. For this reason, I insist that we have to be ready to anticipate challenges, and we are doing it. On prevention, that we also treat here in the report. Yet anticipating challenges is not enough if we already know them. We have to prevent their potential harmful effects. Luckily, the challenges posed by new and frontier technologies come at a time of change in the organization. Both the Secretary General as well as member states have come to the conclusion that we have and that we need to prevent. For this reason, we have agreed on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development that we consider a prevention tool, because if it is achieved, the likelihood of conflict decreases. Now we also talk about sustaining peace, which is another form for prevention. So we also have to start talking from this perspective when we talk about technology, since prevention has always been the priority of the UN, and more we are better equipped to do so, and in fact it's the priority one of the Secretary General Guterres. The panel of digital cooperation established by the Secretary General and its forthcoming report are definitely a step in this direction. Eleanor suggests a global foresight observatory, which is a very intelligent and very clever suggestion to provide the UN with decisive insights to promote peace and security, the respect of human rights, human well-being, and responsible, sustainable development across different regions. These are the kind of bold proposals we need to put on the table to continue advancing in such an important topic. The Global Foresight Observatory that you propose in the report brings a very important topic to the discussion, which is the multi-stakeholder nature of the challenge we are facing. And that is totally relevant if we think about the STI forum that we will be having in 2 weeks in this building. Private sector, academia, civil society, the UN, agencies, all are called to have a role to play in this sector. Most of the technologies are owned and developed by private companies. Most of the research that is taking us to the frontiers of artificial intelligence is taking place in universities and in innovation platforms. Thus, the current governance structures might not be the most efficient ones. We have taken little steps to include the other relevant stakeholders. As I mentioned, the STI forum is in essence a kind of platform, but we don't have any negotiated results from there. It's just a stakeholder encounter, but we can advance and we can exchange views on the technologies. The challenge then is on how to bring these outcomes to the intergovernmental process, and we have to find a solution. And I see some of my colleagues around the room. We have to find solutions on how we can traduce all the problems that we have to face into concrete steps inside the organization, inside our structures, and inside international cooperation to face them. I don't say that the states are not relevant. Of course, the stakeholders' participation is very important, but the state has been quite absent, as we all know, and the state should foster its role in these topics. The states must take care of its citizens. It's an essential obligation. Look for the well-being, and it's an obligation that is not totally entitled to other actors, even if they can participate. The table contained in the report in section 5 draws a distinction between states and some of the private actors involved in these topics. Here at the UN, we depart from a set of values and principles that we do not question. We want to promote social benefits, limit harmful applications, avoid algorithmic bias, transparency, openness, accountability, inclusion, among other principles. Yes, but your table shows not all private companies and institutions, organizations, and organizations target those values and principles because they are not obliged by them. And it is so because their nature is different to the one of the state. Yes, we can advance discussions on corporate social responsibility, but in the end, we are talking about actors whose main driver is the benefit, the economic benefit, not the well-being of peoples. This is a reality, and precisely because of this, the states, the governments must take the responsibility to follow the issue of new and frontier technologies, fostering their positive dimension and limiting their harmful effects. The same happens with the UN. It is a privileged position to promote this topic from a cooperation perspective, which is the essential role of the organization. But we may need, as Eleanor expresses, a new social contract to ensure that artificial intelligence is deployed safely and aligned with the ethical needs of a globalized world. There, ladies and gentlemen, we have a terrible gap. And the ethical dimension may be very difficult to be established by the private companies. Of course. Ethics is something deeply rooted in the state-nation. So there we have a lot of work to do together, the governments. The question is how we take forward then the content of this very useful report. My suggestion is to continue exploring the linkages among the pillars of the organization. We have succeeded in the positive side of new and frontier technologies, especially with the discussions that Mexico has promoted in the GA, the ECOSOC, and the STI. We will have in this October a high-level session on on rapid technological changes this October. So that could be a good opportunity to continue working on this. And the report to the Secretary General is a fantastic opportunity to continue deepening our work. In this, we are, and that's something, we are at the very initial times of these topics. It is fantastic to have the room so crowded as we have it today. It has been very difficult to educate ourselves. I did absolutely nothing. I'm a lawyer about all these topics 3 years ago, and we have totally changed, and we realize that there is a lot of work to do. The next act will be to deepen our action, for example, in SDG 16 on peace, justice, and strong institutions, and even more in the peace and security framework. We have some initiatives in this regarding the first committee. We just talk about it, and perhaps in the discussions of international humanitarian law, but we really need to go further. This UNU publication, along with the report of the Secretary Generals, will prove key to continue advancing in the topic. We need to ensure that new and frontier technologies that have especially those that have dual use, are on our side, and they are not against us. We need to see this dimension clearly, but we are still on time to do so. From Mexico, we have it very clear. We need to pay attention to the human consequences of technological change and act accordingly. We need to minimize the harm to our communities, and at the same time, we need to optimize the use of the technological tools in order to achieve the 169 targets contained in the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And once again, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this presentation, and congratulations to the author, to the institution, and this is a very an extraordinary analysis that contains bold, provocative, and bright proposals for everyone's well-being. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador, for taking on the challenging task of responding to such a rich report. I think you really helped us get a sense of some of the additional complexity and richness there. What came through for me particularly strongly from your response was this central point about the fundamental duty of states to protect their citizens, at being at the heart of the role of the state, bringing us back to the politics in the title, and the central role of the state and cooperation between states in any response to these new technologies. So perhaps that's something we can explore further in the discussion. I turn now to Teresa Whitfield. Teresa from DPPA is going to also respond. Thank you, Teresa, for bringing your wealth of expertise on the practitioner side of conflict prevention. Teresa also is a very accomplished researcher and author herself, and so has seen both sides of the challenging questions put to us today.
Thank you very much, James, and thank you, UNU, and above all, Eleanor, thank you for this fantastic work. I'm easily the most ignorant person on these issues on this panel, and I was thinking, preparing for this, and we've been working closely with UNU on this subject and others, because a lot of us in the Secretariat needing to educate ourselves are turning both outside and to colleagues within the UN, the different bits of the UN, because there's a lot happening within the Secretariat, but we're moving at different speeds. I think agencies, funds and programs, the humanitarian world is much further ahead on these issues than those of us in the core peace and security pillar. And I was thinking how, in some ways, I'm sort of representative of a certain generation of somebody. I've worked on armed conflict issues for 30 years, but I started off in El Salvador, and I remember doing a documentary on the media war in El Salvador around the elections in 1989, 30 years ago, and it involved, on the one hand, kind of running around in the hills of El Salvador with guerrillas carrying huge radio packs on their back, and then some very exciting filming with the Salvadoran army, which was very, in those days, felt very sophisticated, because it had, you got in a helicopter and they had cameras, they were filming propaganda material out of the windows of the helicopters, and all this felt very new and exciting, and all of this is a long time ago. I say this because the process of change and accommodation of those of us who are working in conflicts, and I'm thinking of a number of our SRSGs and envoys and others coming from a very different world, overwhelmed by the complexity of the landscape of conflict, fragmentation of armed groups, regional, trans-border, that overwhelmed by the conflict that is in front of them, at the same time, this new emerging world of new technologies and the impacts that it's going to have on a lot of this work is sort of coming at this community, and we're needing to find ways to respond. So my response comes from there, and in some ways is quite simple. I mean, it's because we're moving, but we're moving from a space that isn't familiar with the emerging world of technology, that isn't familiar with AI, and we're moving into trying to understand the implications for our work. How can we respond? How can we both prevent, think about preventions, but integrate what's available in positive sense into the prevention work? I won't go over the kind of dual use aspect of new technologies and AI that Eleanor spelled out so clearly. As we're a bit short of time, and I want to leave time for Q&A for everybody on the panel. But I think from our perspective, and I speak from DPPA, but from those across the UN who are thinking about conflict prevention specifically, there are all sorts of benefits that the ambassador referred to. If you take a broader sweep at the SDGs, enormous benefits from technology in whole areas in education, health, whole areas of life that I'm not going to touch on. But I will sort of narrowly anchor what I'm thinking and what we're grappling with in thinking about conflict prevention. I think we need to deepen understanding of the ways in which new technologies are changing both the conflict landscape and our response. It's a dual direction. The Secretary-General's strategy on new technologies commits us to deepen the UN's internal capacities and exposure to new technologies. So we're all embarked on an effort to become kind of more literate in this area. It notes that our work must be anchored in the values and obligations of the UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and build on existing capabilities and mandates as we venture forth into this new world. In response, we're looking at both the practical and strategic implications of technologies in the implementation of our mandates. And I say, and I'm recognizing here colleagues from the EOSG, the kind of leadership that's come from the EOSG in pulling together the community of expertise within the UN family has been really, really helpful. More parochially, on a kind of practical level, and I head within the Policy and Mediation Division, I head the Mediation Support Unit. We've been thinking about the implications of technologies, positive as well as I think we tend to be more overwhelmed by the negative aspects of social media, hate speech, incitement to violence, particularly at the moment. That sort of is what people are most talk about. Or you'll have a conversation about new technologies and it goes into, should I be using WhatsApp or should I be using Signal? And that's kind of the end of the conversation. On the practical front, we've just launched, working with the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue in Geneva, a sort of very basic first version of a toolkit on digital technologies and mediation, which aims to raise awareness among mediation practitioners of the implications of digital technologies use in mediation contexts, promote ongoing reflection and discussion, provide mediators with concrete examples of where new technologies, digital technologies mainly, have been used positively. For example, kind of broad consultations in Libya to inform the national conference process, which is, as we know, suspended at the moment. And also to establish a community practice to bring out and bring in those who are, it was based on, the toolkit was based on a wide survey, but then workshops that brought together mediators, some of our SRSGs, some mediators outside the UN, with those who are expert in these technologies. There are other individual projects that we've been in the department, I think, has been good at sort of creating space for innovative projects, which very much driven by individual staff members to push forward. In the Middle East Division, we've been working with a consortium of universities and computational linguists on building a machine learning-based system for detecting and analysing public opinion in the Arab world. The project focuses on opinion mining and sentiment analysis and draws on various social media sources, and has been really helpful in expanding situational awareness and improving our early warning capacities. We're also exploring the establishment of a kind of innovation cell within the peace and security pillar in DPPA that would link up obviously to the work in the EOSG that to help spur new ideas, create space for new ideas. Something we've learnt about innovation is the importance of actually creating space, even if it's a small space, to explore how we can better use and harness emerging technologies, including machine learning, virtual reality, and satellite imagery. At the strategic level, we're also conscious that we're going to have to develop capacity for prevention in an expanding array of domains. In analysing conflicts, we need to develop the ability to identify relevant technology-related political economy issues, including questions related to the digital landscape in a given setting. Really important, and you've seen it in Yemen, for example, of understanding who controls the main internet service providers, how different actors are using social media, data manipulation or deception, who has access to them, just a kind of population survey of how the density and use of social media is really distinct in distinct conflict environments. Also, how the existing use of social media relates to previous media infrastructures and practices. There's a particular problem, I think, in societies that move straight from very closed authoritarian uses of media, kind of fast track up to Facebook, social media, everything, without ever having gone through a more kind of traditional approach to media. In preventive diplomacy, we need to further reflect on how new technologies may impact the Good Office's role of the Secretary-General. How can we understand and foresee the security, resilience, and business capacity of a given state in the event of a serious cyber attack, or including in a fragile or post-conflict setting? And what is the impact of conflict prevention and mediation of cyber attacks? And a whole lot of questions about authentication and consideration, and the whole discussion in the cybersecurity world of when is something, when is a line of numbers become weaponized. In the context of elections, we need to explore the challenges, misinformation, disinformation campaigns, cyber attacks affecting the confidentiality, integrity, and accessibility of election data, or targeting of critical election infrastructure, and opportunities provided by new technologies, new efficiencies brought to elections management through automated voting, for example, and consider how these can be incorporated into broader electoral support strategies. A second aspect of the work of looking at conflict prevention in the era of AI and converging technologies is the point that I think Eleanor touched on very eloquently in the latter part of her presentation, and the report is really good in presenting, which is this the need for, and the Ambassador reference as well, cross-discipline collaborative innovation. And it's something that I think we're acutely aware of from within the Secretariat, and certainly from within DPPA. Preventing tomorrow's conflicts, and this is a refrain of the Secretary-General's, we all know it's probably the most central pillar of his reform, will require us to work beyond yesterday's silos. We'll have to innovate new public-private partnerships and problem-solving networks that share the evidence, develop the analysis, and forge solutions needed to influence conflict parties to turn away from violence. This is not an easy proposition, but it's going to be an increasingly important one, I think. Collaborations could combine experts from preventive diplomacy and emerging technologies to anticipate and get a better sense of what cyber and AI security challenges would constitute a rather minor interference versus what could turn into a major threat to peace or contribute to the growing intractability of existing conflicts. At present, we really don't possess this capacity in any depth, I think. Fostering political preparedness with regard to new forms of security threats requires technical experience, but also expertise in conflict analysis and prevention to understand factors of social resilience and unrest. I think in a way it's quite easy from a UN side to feel, we can feel humbled by what we don't know, but we can forget about the value of what we do know, and the fact that, I mean, in the conversations I've had with private sector actors, kind of Silicon Valley stuff, they don't, the kind of granular understanding of the internal dynamics of conflict that the UN as a system have, because of our field presence and our knowledge of very far places which are very, very, very far from the tech hubs, is incredibly important, and we need to remember that and find a way to marry it with the emerging technology world. So what I think we're going to be looking for is a kind of delicate but necessary alliance that will need to be formed between these two quite separate worlds of private technology corporations and preventive diplomacy specialists. We can marry that by the kind of new staff, new projects, new thinking that happens within the UN, but we also need consistently to be looking outside and looking towards the multisectoral partnerships that both speakers have alluded to. To conclude, I'd just like to reiterate again a huge thank you to Eleanor for this work and to UNU for the continuing collaboration on this and other things. You've given us much to think about, much to learn. One of the exciting aspects, I think, for those of us trying to grapple with all this has been the challenge of really learning new stuff. And that's very exciting as well as very important and much to do. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Teresa. One of the really interesting things in the report, I think, is how the risks emerge out of the combination of technologies. And one of the things I took away, in particular from your closing remarks there, is how the solutions are also likely to emerge from the combination of know-hows. Or human technologies, if I can put it that way. And I think that's a very important practical insight for us to hold on to as we think about how to deal with these huge challenges and risks. We have about 15 minutes only, I'm afraid, for Q&A. So if you would like to ask a question, and we will restrict it to questions, not comments, please get my attention. Please keep it short. Please introduce yourself. We're very evidence-driven at UNU, and all of the science says that you have 40% better female participation if the first question goes to a female. So I would invite the women in particular to get my attention, and I am very likely to invite you to ask a question to the panel. We'll collect 2 or 3 from both genders, and then come back to all genders, I should say, and then come back to the panel. Would anyone like to ask a question? Yes, please. You might want to come to a microphone so those watching at home or in their offices over lunch can hear you. Please just introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Lisenda Vives. I'm the permanent representative of Andorra, and thank you to the gentleman, but I have been appealed for the gender position and my condition. So I have a very short question after the all protocol observed, thanking for the report, and is about ethics and how to make ethics in this field important and really preventive, because every action, doesn't matter which one, it's really marked with the results if we have this concept of ethics very clear, and if there are some steps that have been thinking about that. That is one thing, and I take the advantage now because another problem that I see is the big gap that it's coming with artificial intelligence and the access to really this field of digitalization. It's very difficult to get some simple things that are access to internet, and then how can we mark other steps that are maybe basic but necessary in order to react positively to all the challenges that has been so well described in the report. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Excellency. Rector Malone.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, panel. There we go. Eleanor, AI and the future of work. Will AI be cannibalizing jobs or creating jobs on balance? In poor countries, it goes directly to prevention. Why? Large numbers of unemployed young men are the strongest predictor of internal trouble.
Thank you, Rector. Nice, clear, concise question. Sir?
Thank you very much. I'm Mauro Mielic. I'm director within the Office of Counterterrorism here at the United Nations. Congratulations for the report. We will look at it with strong attention. From our side in the Office of Counterterrorism, we think also that preventative security is critical. And we are looking at expanding strongly the offer of technical assistance and the support to member states, not only in terms of capacity building, but also with technological solutions. We have started, very importantly, with a software which was donated to our office by the government of the Netherlands to detect and analyze with algorithms, very complex algorithms, travel information and passengers information on the API PNR record. But you have mentioned biometrics, you have mentioned removal of terrorist content, facial recognitions. It is vital for us also to identify very important technological solutions, often developed by government, but also private sector or other entities. Of course, that we can promote for non-commercial use, but we can offer to member states and become a vehicle for that. I think this, under the control and the guidance of the Secretary General Office, will be certainly a role that we are happy to promote. And I was wondering whether in the report this identification role and mapping of very good technological solution for preventative aspects could be played by somebody. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think we'll come back to the panel for quick reactions. I have 5 male volunteers for the floor. Giving the first question to the woman doesn't mean we only give the first question to the woman. So when I come back to the floor for another round of questions, please do catch my eye if you'd like to ask one. Eleanor, we'll come to you first. Please answer whatever you want to, and then we'll go to the rest of the panel.
And I will answer, in short fashion, but the first question is about ethics, integration of ethics. And I think, I started my intervention with this tension we are facing between complexity and reductionism. So in times of complexity, when we are facing wicked problems, entangled problems, it seems easier to go towards a reductionist solution, so a technological fix, and those very rarely incorporate ethics and a foresight vision on ethics. So I think what we are missing here, also because we are in a context of atomized responsibility, it is not clear who is responsible for technology's benefits and misuses, and in particular for misuses. So this is why I talk so much about foresight. If you are using foresight tools, you could develop a tool for predictive accountability, meaning that accountability wouldn't be a value that matters in real time or in 1 or 2 years, but during building scenarios with the private sector, civil society, social entrepreneurs, and the UN, we could look precisely at how some of the tech solutions are actually infringing on human rights in different contexts, how they are providing a very adequate solution in others. We could really map out what are some of the potential for misuses and where they could be ethical failures and governance failures. And this work is not being done in the private sector. It's done actually inside the UN in different ways. Foresight is a tool that has been used, but I think on the tech frontier, we really need to have those innovation cell, as Teresa was mentioning, where we can do that exercise of foresight, which is really anticipation of potential failures and anticipation of benefits, and how we can design technologies for mitigating the failures. In a way, AI creating jobs and destroying jobs, the Executive Office offered us the opportunity of a talk with an entrepreneur from the West Coast about a week ago. And she described how some companies on the West Coast were salivating at new software that would replace the jobs of junior lawyers. So some systems can do in 20 seconds what would take about a few hours for a human being. My partner is a lawyer, so it has been a few times I've heard this issue being mentioned. That's why, again, we don't really have a tool for anticipating which type of work will be affected in which context, thinking about different industries in different countries. We don't have a tool to anticipate that. And you have some studies that are out, but that are pretty much speculative at this point. So if we could use foresight in a specific interstate mechanism, or a mechanism that's multi-stakeholder, where we have the private sector engaged in a certain region, that would be present for thinking about scenarios of how some certain jobs are going to be impacted, that I think would be very useful. What the entrepreneur was talking about in terms of a solution or a future was having a job for purpose, having meta skills that are creative and that lead you to always overcome technological revolution. But that's not given to everyone necessarily. So we absolutely need to be thinking about public literacy, systems for social resilience, where we can enhance the acquisition of those meta skills, where we don't tell everybody to just learn how to code because in 10 years this is going to be done by AI systems, but really have a tunneling vision of how the market is changing in different countries, and then prepare for the production of those skills. Preventive security. Again, that's what I would imagine, in an exercise of foresight, is really be able to understand, because when I talk about tailoring technological design for accountability and mitigation, what you are looking at is algorithmic design, issues about data protection, data flows, data security, but also human intent and social resilience. And so you have technological factors, but you also have those social human factors that are very important. So human intent, how do we think about transfer of intangible transfer of knowledge? Crossing of expertise across different borders, different types of actors, and the tools that are being used for doing so. How do we think about social resilience so that people are better prepared for these forms of manipulation that could happen? So when you envision the tech solution, the design is so important, and I think that could be treated inside the foresight exercise with a diversity of actors.
Thanks, Eleanor. Excellency, Sandoval Mandela, would you like to come in? Yeah.
Thank you. On the ethics, I think that there is a pending issue for many countries, that some efforts are currently done, especially in the European Union, for example. That's what I remember. But I think that there is something extraordinarily philosophical behind this, because there is a confusion between the liberty of the market and with the use of big data and the liberty of people, that in order to have the algorithms that will give any kind of companies the codes of human behavior. And that's where the problem is. And we shouldn't. How far can the market go, or how far could the information of human behavior can be a merchandise? Where are the limits to its use, or the medical information? And as a user of any kind of medical service, you have to adhere of what they tell you, otherwise you don't receive the attention, basically. So I think that there is still a lot of work to be done in many countries, and those are the places where we have to pay attention. On the future of work, I think that there is a fantastic report of ILO on the topic. It's a topic for this STI. Please come to the STI forum. SDG 7 will be 7 or 8. SDG 8 will be analyzed, so important conclusions may be taken from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. I'm going to come to the representative of Interpol.
Thank you very much. Interpol connects 124 member states. It was created in 1923 because criminals started to use very, very high-tech technology such as cars and trains. So you see the technology is progressing very, very quickly, and we need to stay very ahead of the curve. So I'd like to congratulate UNU and Eleanor for the tour de force on convergence, which is your aspect today. My question is, we know, and as police officers, we know how to take action. We know how to train, we know how to react in the real world, but how do we switch from this kind of blind action to a political agenda? How do we put this on the political agenda of the UN, with a difficulty which is that we need a whole of UN approach and agenda on this, with very different aspects, point of views, such as peace and security, development, human rights, that don't go very easily all together. So how do you see a transfer from action, your work, studies, and political agenda of the UN? Thank you.
Thank you. I've got time for two more very briefly, and I saw Richard Gowan gesturing before. No, I see no requests, so Richard, it's over to you, I think.
Richard Gowan, previously from UNU, now with Crisis Group. My question leads on directly from Interpol's to Eleanor, which is, can we achieve one of your better scenarios if at least two very major powers, the US and China, don't want to play ball, and probably a couple of other permanent members of the Security Council? Is it possible to build a coalition for the multilateral control of these technologies between mid-level economies and poorer economies, as you describe, if a couple of very big economies are just simply not interested in this sort of regulation and cooperation?
Great. A nice, easy, uncontroversial one there, Richard. Thanks. Any last requests for the floor? Going once, twice? Sir, yes.
Hi, I'm Osvaldo Torres from Chile. I'm consultant in technologies. My question is additional question is whose humans are. It's very important to identify, to recognize humans. Is the next step of this problem. Today, we are technologies to use biometric authentication to identify people, but each people is different. It's one condition. This condition is possible to include in the future of the regulations or the policies where robots are similar to people. It's a big risk that we are identifying.
Thank you very much. So a pretty important question there about the integrity of data and the distinction between human beings and machines, I think. So again, a nice easy one for you to end with. I'll go in reverse order. Teresa, did you want to jump in on any of those, having passed last time?
I was just part in response to that latter one, and also to David's thing about work. One of the sort of interesting and perhaps reassuring things for most people in the room, and it goes to the essential, when we were doing the work and the surveys on possible applications of digital technology to mediation, both the risks and the challenges, the core human aspects of a lot of the work of mediation and a lot of the work of the diplomacy, and the extent to which there are certain kind of things, trust, impartiality, building confidence, are actually not going to be replaced by anything. So there are some of us who will still be in work failing to mediate conflicts for a very, very long time. Thanks.
I see you're on the pessimistic side of the optimistic-pessimistic divide. Ambassador.
I think that you have to build on trust and on confidence among governments, because it doesn't matter how big your economy is, because a small country with a small economy can have the biggest control on their population. The value here is how deep the information that you get from your people and the human behavior that you can trade with, you obtain. And it doesn't matter if you are the big company or not. Here, the point is also that a lot of personal information, the big data, is transboundary information. And there are the big companies, and you know very well them somewhere in California, that they got information about hundreds of thousands of millions of people around the world. And that value that can have an extraordinary value in the future. So how to establish the limits there? That's a lot of the pending issue that everybody talks about it and nobody wants to tackle it. And I don't see a real role maybe for the UN to deal with this kind of regulation, but at least we have to try to find solutions to tackle with this. I really don't know how we're going to handle all these issues.
Thank you, Excellency. And I think fittingly the last word is yours, Eleanor.
Thank you so much, James. I'm going to tackle the question of the political agenda, and I think Richard and Emmanuel were asking a similar question. I'm going to be a pessimist in this starting remark, but I think the stakes are too big to some extent for really finding at the level of the Security Council a form of agreement over what kind of model of governance we want for this technological revolution. AI convergence promises new ways to achieve economic and security supremacy in ways that are pervasive, extremely powerful, and ranging from digital tools and weapons to biological insights and new forms of control. So I wouldn't see, this entry point as the most flourishing way of working on this debate. But I think we can do much more at other levels. So those forms of foresight I'm describing were private and social entrepreneurs, where engineers from social media companies and experts in preventive diplomacy can meet in a safe space and describe the tools, describe the vision, be open enough and transparent enough to talk about some of the potential risks and imagine how we can tweak design to make it more accountable and integrating ethics. I think that's where we can have an impact. And to some extent, the private sector is globalized, but has a huge responsibility in this new governance we are shaping right now. And so maybe there is a way to work behind the scene or to work within foresight cells, fusion cells, to bypass maybe some of the most complicated dynamics of the Council of Despair, like you described so well in your last brief, and try to work on bringing the expertise, as Teresa was saying, which is so well developed in specific fields, in preventive diplomacy, in knowing about deep drivers of conflict, in anticipating different types of social tension, bringing this in the same room with the private sector, which is a space that has no clue about those kind of issues right now. I think that's a way for us to shape the future, maybe most powerfully than other kind of debates.
Thank you, Eleanor. That's a very constructive place on which to end today's discussions. I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you to those of you who are watching at home. Indeed. You do deserve a round of applause. Those of you in the room have a hard copy. If you are online, you can find it at cpr.unu.edu, where you can also get more information about our upcoming events. Finally, my sincere thanks to Teresa Whitfield, to Ambassador Sandoval Mandialea, and of course to Eleanor for all the tremendous hard work and insight she's put into the report. Please do take it away and study it closely, and we'll look forward to seeing you again at another Centre for Policy Research event. Thank you very much.
So much.